We're gonna do a little kind of spooky Halloween candlelight yin class here. We're gonna start in a child's pose. And so what I've done here on my mat, by the way, welcome. What I've done here on my mat is I put down this blanket that's kind of fluffy so that my shins and the top of my ankles and my knees have a little bit of extra softness. And then I've also got this fairly sizable pillow. And I'm gonna take the knees out a little wide, toes a little closer together, and put the pillow underneath my, kind of like just underneath my torso, from my belly button up to the chest, because it holds my head just a little bit higher, just if you're coming in just now. But anyway, this gives me a little bit softer version of the child's pose. And for some of us, child's poses can be a little bit tricky for the knees, stuff like that. So this is an option. Now, if you don't have a pillow like this one, I have done a couple of couch cushions. I've also taken a really big quilt or something like that, a blanket that's a little thicker, and just rolled it up. So it'll make something, that's basically what this is anyway. It's just a rolled up quilt with a cover over it. So you can also do this without any of that. And if you're not into the child's pose, pick another pose. You can join us after with the next pose. It'll be fine. So I'm going to turn my head one direction, and I'll give you guys a halfway mark. And we'll turn the head the other direction. We're going to stay a little while, so you can do like a little side-to-side wobble, kind of settle in. For me, it helps to start a little bit lighter and then just let myself work backwards as my knees and hips and ankles accommodate the shifting pose. And then we'll just take deep breaths. Yin yoga is nice and slow paced. We're going to stay with the poses a while. If child's pose is not your jam, pick another one. So now if you've had your face turned one direction, you can turn it the other way. We're about halfway through here. Feels really nice to just kind of unwind a bit here. We're going to take about 4 more breaths where we are. So for the last minute, you have a choice of just staying right where you are, because that's plenty, or just taking the legs a little bit wider apart and turning it more into a frog pose. And we're going to do it for about another minute here. So it's just sort of an add-on. Knees maybe go a little wider, feet might flip out a little bit like a little flipper. Just make sure that your inner thighs and groins are not going to call you bad names when we're done with this. About 3 more big breaths. this for me, it's best if I kind of lean forward a little bit, get a little bit of the weight away from the heels, and then bring one knee in at a time, kind of picking them up. That's, oh, the best. It's intense. It's an intense pose. And it helps to have a little bit of muscle. Some people will go just right onto the belly, so if that's better, you can do it that way. Just be mindful of your groins. Make sure they also agree that that's a good idea. Now I'm going to take my soft surface away here for a second, because what we're going to shift into is the Sphinx pose. And if you did a different pose, not child's pose, but something else, you can take a few moments to kind of jiggle around and then eventually come to the Sphinx. So I'm just going to do some little windshield wipery moves here. And then kind of slowly unfurl. The Sphinx is basically just propped up on the elbows. We're kind of holding ourselves in a little cobra-like shape. You can do a seal, which is propping up on your hands, or you can take it down and do what I call the crocodile, because it sort of feels like you're laying under the water with your eyeballs sticking up, like crocodiles are wont to do. So you can cross the forearms and kind of rest your chin or your forehead. So it's just a little baby back bend. So choose an appropriate amount of lumbar support there, lumbar intensity. We're not trying to go for wreck our low back. We're trying to go for, like, I feel like there's an opening in my front body, in the belly, the hip flexors, a little bit of the chest, and there's little mild compression in the low back, but not enough to cause any trouble. And if you've had kind of a day, like I've been online with a help desk, customer support people for a large portion of my day today. I would say online. I've been on hold with them for a fairly significant portion of my day today. So that has created some stress in my neck. So I'm kind of, from time to time, just sort of stretching the neck out a little bit, giving myself a little room to sort of play with the muscles there. And I'll give you some other options for that along the way tonight as well. If you're maybe you weren't online with the help or on the phone with the help desk, but you were, you know, equally challenged by your life today. Stay here for about another minute or so. I find like this pose tells me kind of when it's done baking. Sort of like the little plastic timer that comes in the turkey on Thanksgiving tells you when you should take the turkey out of the oven by popping open. My low back kind of gives me some signals, and so I start to feel the pose in my glute instead of in my lumbar. So as soon as I kind of feel that sensation in the glute, I know I'm pretty close to done with the pose. So I usually give myself another minute there. So you can try timing it. 3 minutes, 4 minutes, somewhere in that range is generally pretty good for the Sphinx. So we're going to come on out of there, and again, you can do some movement, like some little windshield wipers, that sort of thing. We're going to add a shoulder opener here, because it's one of my favorite things for our current reality of way too much online life and not enough roaming around the office kind of life. So, or whatever. Like, my life has significantly changed in terms of the amount of square footage that I wander about in. So we're going to take one arm and stick it out. So I'm going to stick my left arm out here, and then you take the opposite leg and we're going to roll that leg over like that. Put it on the floor. Then you're going to adjust the arm until you feel a stretch in the chest and top of the shoulder, front of the shoulder, but it doesn't make your fingers numb or tingly. So numb, tingly fingers means the arm bone is not in the right place, and it's pinching a nerve that lives right in between the base of the spine, of the skull, and the area where the shoulder blade, the collarbone, and the arm bone all come together. So we want that part of the arm to feel open and spacious. And then I give myself a little head rest. And this is okay. I don't mind just resting my foot there. That's okay some of the time. And then sometimes I'll stretch that leg out and sort of let this hip get heavy so it holds me in this shape a little bit better. You can take this arm behind your back. I just put it up front and use it like a little kickstand so I can lean into it if the pressure's too great on my shoulder. I can take it away a little bit and it just holds me stable. So choose for yourself what's right for you. Again, at any point, if you get some tingling in your fingertips, we're coming out of there. We're going to stay here for a couple minutes. Not as long as we might do for like the denser tissue around the hips or the legs, but long enough to get some benefit here. All right, you guys, we're going to take 2 breaths. And then we're going to come out of there by just taking that leg back across. And then I like to do just some little like, movements in the shoulder when we're done there, because that feels nice. And then if you like notice your arm, and if the arm feels fairly pleasant, you probably did a good job. If your arm feels really sore, especially if there's any soreness right in this kind of front pocket or up the side of your neck, you're going to want more support, or you want to put your arm in a different place for the second side. Sometimes the arm needs to be way lower or even a little higher than the shoulder in some people. For some people, that's better. So reach out. I like my palm up, but you might want your palm down. It's another thing you can try. And then take yourself over, and before you get all the way in the pose, start playing with your arm, adjusting the position until it feels like that whole space up here in the front of the shoulder is open, kind of spacious. Doesn't feel pinchy, and there's definitely no tingling or numbness. Right on. Give myself a tiny bit of support around the pumpkins. Oh goodness. And again, sometimes for me, like after the first like minute and a half or 2 minutes, there's a point where I sort of feel like things let go a little bit and there's a little bit of a release. And so when I feel that, I might change my arm position a little bit. It's okay to change your arm position. You just don't want to be too fidgety. So there's a difference between sort of intentionally going, oh, things have shifted, let me change a little bit, and just kind of being unable to settle. If you're unable to settle, it's probably because the pose isn't right. So take your time to get the pose right, or come out of it. Like, it might be just not right today. That's okay too. The poses are just tools that we're using to be present and develop a greater sense of sensitivity to our bodies and to the world around us. So as we're developing that kind of sensitivity, and we're paying attention, and we're breathing, and noticing how the body responds to poses when we're done with them, all of those are kind of the layers that are more important than the pose itself. In my world. In the world that I occupy. Welcome to my world. So we're going to stay for another minute or so. Okay, so we'll take 3 more breaths. Alrighty, so then I'm just going to bring this whole thing back around. Once my shoulder's all the way out of the pose, then I can do some little movements. Now we're going to come to a seated position for the next little section. So if you want, you can take a few moments to do like some cat shapes or some downward dogs before we get to sitting, because we've been in a back bend kind of almost shape for some time. So it might be nice before we switch gears to move around a little bit. All right, it might be helpful to have a few items. We're gonna do a little sequence of 3 poses. A deer, square pose, or the shoelace, which is more like the cow face pose. You might be more familiar with that name, or gomakasana. And then a kind of Janu Shirsa, it's called the half dragonfly pose. So a couple things will be useful. You might want a blanket. You might want something you can stack your elbow up on. So we're gonna do this kind of side bending thing where we're gonna hold our head in our hand. So you might need, like, you might be able to do that from your thigh, but if not, like, get some things that you can stack up. You can even use like a Halloween pumpkin, like whatever you got handy will work. Stack of books, whatever you got, so that you can kind of do this little thing. So we're gonna stretch the neck, but we want it to be really mindful and gentle. So you're gonna want, when we get to that's gonna be the 3rd pose, but it might be helpful to have a few things, like a little stack of blocks for that, and some other things just to make your hips more comfy. So we're gonna start with the deer, and you can turn the deer into a couple of different shapes. So we'll start with getting the legs in place. So the legs go like about 90 degrees apart from one another. And then this leg is turned backwards, so there's an internal rotation at the hip. And then there's about a 90-degree angle at the knee. No one's getting out protractors or anything like that. Just kind of in that neighborhood. If it's more comfortable for you to keep it a little tighter, do that. Front knee similarly, about 90 degrees. No one's going to judge. Okay, so possibility number 1 is just sit up tall. Possibility number 2 is to fold forward. This becomes a little bit closer to the swan / pigeon end of the world. Possibility number 3 is to add a twist to it. Now, sometimes I prefer to twist to the outside, and sometimes I prefer to twist to the inside. So all of those are options. I'm gonna do half and half. I'm gonna do half sitting upright and half folding forward. So if you wanna join me like that, you can. And then my goal is just to let this hip get as soft as possible while I'm in this pose, because it's a weird hip shape. Ooh. We'll just pause and breathe. About halfway through, got a couple breaths before we're halfway. It's a good moment just to kind of notice how things are going. Should you change the angles? Is it just right as it is? Check in with yourself. Make sure you're doing nice deep breaths, yogis. About another minute. Do 3 more breaths with the pose we're in. Okay, so to get out of here, I'm gonna lean away from the back leg and then bring it around. It's gonna go on top of this leg in just a second, but first, it feels nice to kind of shimmy it out a little bit. I'm just giving like my thigh a little back and forth jiggle. You can be more dramatic or less so. Feels nice though. Oh. All right, so then you have some options. So the first option is to bring the knees on top of each other. For me, that kind of causes my hips to tilt in one direction. So this one's better, which is the shins are stacked up on top of each other. That gives me a more level pelvis. The only problem is my ankle joint pushes into the tiny, really super tender flesh of my inner thigh, knee area. So I like this one better. Put a block in front and move the leg forward. And you can do this one a little even bigger. So you can put the block way out in front just support whatever you need to support. And that can help make this more accessible if your hips are really, really tight. And if they're really, really tight, just sitting cross-legged on the floor might be plenty. So you can also do that. You don't have to do any stacking at all. The object of the game is to get the legs as close to the middle as possible, just because that gives us the most kind of focus on this outer hip. But if you feel it there already, you're there. That's what we're doing. And again, I'm going to kind of play with this pose a little bit. So I'm going to do a couple minutes just sort of sitting more upright, leaning slightly forward. And then I'm going to do a couple minutes kind of giving myself just a little bit of a side bend. Not as big as we're going to do with the next pose, but just like a sense of sort of lengthening out the side of my neck more than anything else. Just again, kind of reduce some of the tension I've been experiencing today. Being on hold with people on a phone is not my easiest task. I find it very frustrating. I should check myself before I wreck myself. I'm aware of that, yogis. So we're breathing, working through it. It's not the worst thing that could be happening to me today. Whew. So this might be a little bit more of a button pushy pose. It might be one that feels a little more intense. It can be, for sure. Now, some people even need to lean back a little bit in this pose. So if you're feeling like any forward momentum at all is way too much, try leaning backwards, see if that helps a little bit. We're about halfway through, just a couple more breaths and then we're halfway. Okay, so all I'm gonna do is just sort of let myself slightly lean this way. This hip is the leg that's on top for me is the hip that's a little bit spicier. It's a little bit more interesting. So I'm letting that side be the side that's kind of stretching out a little bit, which is the opposite of what I'm gonna do in a minute. And then I'm just letting my head sort of drop over. And I'm not so much, because I'm not gonna stay here very long, but I can also sort of change the angle so I can tuck my chin in and that stretches more towards the back of the neck. I can lift the chin up and feel that a little bit more around the side. When we get to the next pose, it's going to be the whole spine, all the way from the pelvis up to the skull. But for this, it's mostly just like a little bit of a lean and mostly the neck. At least for me. You might be doing other things. And again, I sort of like to play with where is the intensity? Where do I need to kind of focus a little bit of attention? You might have different places than I do. This shoulder is kind of lifted up to help, so I'm making a note of that with my awareness. Try not to be too pushy, so it doesn't feel the need to help. All right, so we got about 4 more breaths here. Give or take, based on how big your breaths are. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of let myself come back to the center. The next thing I'm going to do is lean backwards and unwind this top leg. Now the top leg is going to become the straight one. The bottom one is going to stay bent, but again, we can do this little like, ooh, because that knee's been bent for a while. So if you want a little extra shimmy, you can rinse it out. Now the thing that makes this the dragonfly and not the butterfly is that we get the thighs kind of out at an angle so that there is a sense of like I'm wide apart. Now you might find it very comfortable to bring your foot all the way in here. When I do that, it closes the angle down and I want the angle to stay wide. So I just let my foot hang out here. we're going this way towards the long leg. So I'm going to move that leg so that it sort of lines up with my side. Then I'm going to build my little foundation here so that wherever the trajectory of arc, if that's the right word, I might be a different word, but mathematicians fix me later. But in any case, like, we're kind of letting this arc happen, and we're going to catch our head right in the pattern, okay? So we're holding on so that the head has some support, but we feel this nice stretch all the way down the side of the whole torso. From the ear, maybe, or you might even feel it from your scalp, all the way down to the hip. Sometimes I have to shift the angle because this part of the low back can be quite sensitive. So turning a little bit this way or a little bit that way with the ribs might be necessary to make that safe, or feel safe anyway. You'll know if there's discomfort there, listen to it. About halfway through, just kind of noticing that point, seeing if there's something that kind of indicates you should add more support or back off a little bit, or if your body's feeling more comfortable in the pose. Just make a note of those things. Act accordingly. Take 3 more big breaths. All right, holding that last breath in, I'm going to come all the way up. Now I'm holding my head as I come up just to give my neck that little extra bit of support. Now that I'm up, I'm going to unwind my legs. So I definitely feel a difference here. This side feels different than this side. So I'm going to take a few moments and just kind of move around a little bit before we do the other side. You can do any movement pattern that you like, from interpretive dance to downward dog to some cat-cows, whatever would feel nice to you. Lay down. Any can also not move, dramatically so. Just figure out what's best. Or experiment if you're not sure. Try different things, see what happens. Oh. I'm just waiting for a kind of sensation in my body that feels like the the sides of my neck are a little more on the even side. It feels like my shoulders are a little more even, and my lower back feels like the sides are a little more even, right? So with the spine having been bent in that position for a while, the fluid shifts around. So I'm just waiting for that sense that the fluid's kind of all back to the center, all back to neutral. Alrighty, so it's time for the opposite side. Maybe you need a couple more minutes. That's also fine. Do your thing. All right, so we're gonna start with the deer. So we're gonna bring ourselves around. So we've got a deer shape, and again, I'm gonna do the deer in kind of 2 stages, for folding forward, but also sitting up. So I'm gonna start with the sitting up version of the deer. I'm just giving myself like a little armrest here because I find that helpful. You don't need the armrest. If you want to do a side leaning version or you want to do a twisty version, you can do that too. It's your pose, make it yours. And we'll stay for a while. I'm just trying to allow myself to kind of come to a place that feels softer, a little more receptive around this hip without being too pushy. Halfway through, so I'm going to lean myself a little forward here. And again, you don't have to change your pose, but if you want to, this is a good spot. Every now and then, if your mind kind of starts to travel away, just come back to your breath. Pay attention again. So we're getting close to the end of the pose. We've got a few more breaths to go. It's nice to just kind of notice how you've settled in. So we're going to take one more breath where we are. And then we're going to change it so that we can bring this leg around to put it up on top. So again, you might, I like to pause in between shapes and just give that a little bit of a movement pattern, little rinse. When I feel like there's a sense of ease and my hip has let down its guard, which just feels like softer, then I go into the next shape. So whether that's the square or the shoelace or a variation of those two. In the yin world, the names are changed, but you can call them by their regular yoga names. I'm not going to police you. So, this is often called double pigeon or fire logs in other yoga circles beyond the yin. The original goal or concept was to give the poses different names so that we didn't bring any baggage into the yin practice. None of the notions we had about how poses were supposed to be aligned or the variations, that sort of thing, so that you could kind of come to the poses fresh. I'm just not sure it actually works that way. Like, I think once you get your body in this shape, you're like, oh yeah, I know that shape. Hello, tiny wees. How are you? Here, let me move that out of your way. So, in any case, I'm not sure it really works out that well, so you can call it what you want. This is my take on things. I might change my mind later. So we're going to hang for a bit with this little shape. Breathe in, paying attention, whether to things in our environment or our pose, whatever's going on. So, one thing that I told you guys that I was going to do for the spooky season was that I was going to come up with some slightly spooky stories that have kind of a yogic theme. So I'm going to tell you tonight's story over the next two poses. So tonight's story is a parable, and it's the parable of the sadhu, which is like a monk. It's a practitioner of yoga who dedicates, maybe lives in a temple, something along that line. A dedicated practitioner. And the scorpion. So the scorpion part is the spooky part. So the parable goes like this. One day, the sadhu decided to take a bath in the river. And so when he got to the river, he found a scorpion swimming in the river, and clearly scorpions don't swim, and so he knew the scorpion was not intending to be in the river. So he thought he would save the scorpion. So he reaches down to pick the scorpion up and to bring him up and put him on dry land, and the scorpion stings him, and he lets go, and the scorpion falls back into the water. And so sadhu reaches down, picks up the scorpion to bring him onto the dry land, whoop, gets stung, drops the scorpion back in the water, and he does this over and over and over again. Every time he picks up the scorpion to rescue it, the scorpion stings the sadhu. So apparently not a particularly deadly scorpion, but in any case, a hunter nearby sees this go down and comes over to the sadhu and says, why don't you just let the scorpion drown? Because every time you pick it up, it stings you. And sadhu says, it's the scorpion's nature to sting, and it's my nature to be helpful. So I can't let the scorpion's sting change my nature. So I'll let you consider what the scorpions in your life are like. So we're going to stay with this pose for about another 5 breaths or so. We got about 30 more seconds. But often we let our circumstances or let circumstances change us. Let us, they make us angry or make us grouchy. And I definitely was listening to this parable in my head while I was getting grouchy about being on the phone today. So it's like, it's the nature of help desks to put you on hold. And it is your nature to remain patient. It's not my nature at all, but which is the grist. But my intention is to remain patient. So in any case, I think it's a good parable for difficult times, and especially we're going through a time. Let's come on out of here. Oh, a nice big lift backwards, and then you're going to free that leg, and you can free both legs for a few moments. But it's a time when we have a lot of sort of discontent and a lot of different ideas about how things should go over the next 4 years. And can we stay true to our own nature is the question. in my mind. So, regardless of what happens. So here is my shape again. This is the half dragonfly. So I've got the thighs in a V, and you can, again, you can wait a little longer if you need. Pad up the surfaces that need to get padded up so that it feels reasonable. And then we're going to create, again, whatever kind of, where do you need the height to be on your head support, neck support. Okay, so I'm going to adjust, bend from my waist all the way up, and then try to figure out where does that go so I can catch my head. Because I want the sense of my neck kind of stretching out, and I'm leaving my arm like this, but you could just as easily put your arm over your head. I just find that I get a little bit more loveliness around my neck if my arm is down. And it's a little different if the arm is up, but you get to decide. And then I'm going to monitor the stretch, and I might wind up turning inward a little bit or turning outward a little bit based on how it feels as I go along here. So we're about halfway through, which is a good time to turn back into your breath. Inside of our last minute, which is a good time to kind of check in. Should you back off or maybe even come out of the pose? Does it feel like, oh, it's letting you have a little bit more space maybe? You can go into the pose a little more without being too greedy or too aggressive. Allow the body to find its place. Okay, so we're going to take 2 more breaths. Again, I'm going to kind of use that last inhale, hold it in, come up, holding onto my head so my neck gets all the way neutral, or pretty close to neutral anyway. and I got my back more or less close to neutral down. Again, you can do some little movement patterns with the legs, with the torso. You can just wait this out a little bit, let everything settle. So the last little sequence of poses we're going to do all on our back. We're going to do, starting with a supported fish pose, which is a chest opener. And often I start with this pose, so it's really nice. And then we'll do supported bridge pose, which you could turn into legs up the wall instead if you want to do that. Just position yourself somewhere nearby for that. And then if you have a wall or whatever, a couch, whatever you want to throw your legs up and over. And then the last thing will be a little spinal twist before we do a final relaxation. So to do supported fish, you'll need something to lift the upper part of your back. So fish pose is like cobra pose upside down, or sphinx upside down. So a couple of yoga blocks works really well, one for your shoulder blades, one for your head. I'm going to use this pillow. This one I could use, but it's a little too high for me. I have short arms, and so they don't quite touch the ground, so I'm going to use a smaller pillow. But you can find your way. So if you had like a blanket like this, you can fold it so that you've got enough of a lift that you can put that underneath down the middle of your back, and you'll get a similar shape. Okay, so put the pillow or the block or wherever down. Now this is going to wind up just underneath the bottom of my shoulder blades. So the little bottom spines of my shoulder blades will be slightly above the edge of this. Similar for blocks. And the blocks, you want to pretty much get that block right under the shoulder blades because it's a little firmer and it'll poke you in the back. This won't poke me in the back quite so badly, but it does still do better if I put it higher up. So then snuggle the shoulder blades under you, and the legs are going to go out straight here if possible. You can put something under your knees so that there's a sense of kind of lift through the rib cage. And that gives us that kind of fish. Now, I have my head supported because, again, I'm a little sensitive in going backwards like this with my neck. And my neck is already a little sensitive today. So, but you can put the support in so that your head drops back like a more traditional fish pose. And that is up to you. So we'll stay with this guy for about 3 minutes. Then we'll shift it to the supported bridge for a little longer, about 4 minutes, maybe even 5, you know, if it's comfy. And then we'll do the twist and Shavasana. Oh. This is a pose, like, especially when I get to the poses at the end of the practice, I like to just pay attention, like, am I unwinding every muscle that's not getting used to make this pose happen? So there's a little bit of spiciness for me, like right here at the very front of the shoulder. Not as spicy as that twisty thing we did, prone, some people call it broken wing. I find that like a kind of horrifying name. It makes me very sad. I always called it the Sleeping Buddha shoulder opener, but you guys tell me which name you like better. Broken wing's more Halloween-y. But this is more subtle than that, but there is just this, like, just the tiniest little bit of kind of spiciness, and there's the tiniest little bit of spiciness in the low back. And so This one allows me to relax really a little bit more because it's just barely spicy. So I can remind myself to unwind my eyes and let my eyes get really soft, and unwind around the jaw, let the teeth get a little, you know, a little part between the teeth, a little softness around the lips. So the lips are fluffier. You can make your eyes feel a little kinder. The gaze that you get, you know, when you gaze outward, both physically and, you know, spiritually, that's a kind gaze that you're sending out into the planet. Okay, so we've got 1 minute left here, or just shy of that. Okay, so I'm going to take 2 more breaths. Now, depending on what you have underneath you, you might have to remove 1 object or 2. And for me, the easiest thing to do is to go ahead and put my feet on the floor and then just roll to the side and scoop out whatever's underneath me. So it could have been a blanket, it could have, oh, it feels so good. It could have been a couple blocks. But whatever I have underneath my back, it's always a little different. So like the blanket is a little different than the blocks, a little different than the pillows. Depending on the size of the pillow, it's always a little bit different. And every day is a little different. But there's a sense of kind of like an impression sort of left behind. It feels nice to kind of move the shoulder blades around a little bit. And I love doing this where I reach out enough that I pull my shoulder blade kind of out of the middle of my back, and then just rock on the floor right between your shoulder blades. Oh, it's not the deep tissue massage that I used to get where the girl would put her elbow in underneath my shoulder blade and dig in there, but it's nice. Really quite nicer than the deep tissue massage, if I'm honest. Probably not as effective, but nicer. Okay, so then we're going to put something under the hips. And I'm just going to use this pillow because it's here. But you can use a block. You can use a folded blanket. I'm just going to kind of work my way up here. So we want the object under the pelvis. Okay, so the pelvis is supported. So this pillow is wide enough that that happens nicely. You might need, like a block works really nicely too. That'll work just fine. Stack of books could work. You know, 1 or 2, like the Shakespeare anthology maybe, or something like that. I used to have this book in college that was an anthology of English literature. There were 2 volumes that were about 4 inches wide a piece. That would be perfect. So, like anything like that you've got. Yoga blocks are great because they're sort of made for this and they're slightly softer than a book. But you can throw a little, like a couple of towels underneath your hips, whatever you got. So you've got an elevation in the hip. Now you can leave your feet like that. You can stretch the legs out like this. That's a bigger hip flexor stretch. And one of the things I like about it is that it pulls some of the weight away from my neck. So there is a kind of softer shape in the upper body. Whereas if I bring my legs up like that, or I bring them in, there's a little more weight on my shoulders. So you can decide how to roll with this. And you can also put in legs up the wall as a substitute for the supported bridge if you like. So I'm going to do 1 leg straight and 1 leg bent because that's my favorite, and we'll do half and half. Oh, so about 4 minutes. If you're loving life, you could, you know, maybe stay a little longer. We'll see how things go. be moving around all of my glowy Halloween props in this moment. If you're going with me and you're doing half and half like I was doing, then I'm switching legs at this point. And one of the things that I find kind of interesting too while I'm here is the leg that's stretching out, I'm turning my head away from that side. So there's just a little bit of sense of stretch through the neck that way as well. Oh, I'm liking it, I'm digging it. I'll offer that to you. You decide if you're joining me or doing your own thing. All right, yogis. This is the point where you have to ask yourself, am I ready to come down? Or am I staying one more minute because I'm in love right now and I don't want to come down yet? Well, I'm going to come back. So to come back, I'm going to bring my feet back in underneath me. And then I'm just going to lift my hips enough to slip the pillow out. Oh. And then once I'm down, I like to give my sacrum just a little bit of love. So windshield wiper legs work really great. Or you can bring the knees in and kind of circle around right where that sacrum is. Whichever one of those you like better. Sometimes I like one, sometimes the other, sometimes both. Oh. And then what I like about the windshield wipers is it sort of leads me into the spinal twist. And we're going to do a shorter version of this. So about 2 minutes on each side. So we'll take the legs over one way. I'm going to step over here. And you can stack the legs. You can do the cat pulls its tail, where you take the bottom leg, kind of reach down, grab the foot. You can do kind of a version of the leg where you sort of wrap your legs almost like an eagle pose and come on over. So whatever version is going to work best for you. Oh. You can turn your head away from or towards the knees. Whichever, again, kind of feel it out. Play with different options. Go with the one that you're liking the most tonight. And know that we're kind of ramping into our final relaxation, so it doesn't need to be really pushy. It can be really sweet. Take a big breath. And then come on back to the middle. And again, you can do whatever little rinsey kind of movement pattern feels nice. Let your spine kind of settle. I can tell when it's time to go to the next side because there's no longer any sense of weirdness when I take the legs over the opposite direction. That feels normal right now. That feels a little strange. But in a second, it won't feel as strange. See, now, it doesn't feel strange. So now it's time to go over to the other side. So you'll know. Again, this is this kind of idea that I have of kind of, like, I didn't notice that 10 years ago. Like, you know, the longer I practice, the more sensitive I become to these really interesting sensations. And it's almost like permissions, gateways, where the body's like, yeah, okay, I'm willing to go along with you on that notion. And the practice has become a little less of a struggle and a little more of just a kind of dance, which I think is lovely. And since it's kind of in my nature to be a little bit pushy, it's nice to sort of find a different way of being. A little less pushy. We're just going to stay for about another 4 breaths. And then the last part of this is just to kind of ease your way into Shavasana. Now, if it's a little chilly at your house, it might be nice to cover with a blanket. You can put an eye pillow on your eyeballs. Well, eyelids maybe. But you just kind of make it cozy and a little bit deep and nice so that you want to sink down into that. So we're coming on back. I'm going to cover up with a blanket, so I'm going to invite it to come this way. because I left it too far away to grab with my hands. Oh boy. So I've got a little bit of support under my legs, and I've got a nice little soft, fluffy blanket over me. So whatever, oh, it feels nice. I've created a bit of a cocoon, yogis. That's the notion. Kind of give yourself a nice, comfy place to land. And we don't have to stay forever, but we'll stay for a few minutes so that we can really just, we don't want there to be any tug or pull on the body. We want the body to be super comfortable, so that we let the nervous system just really integrate all of the things we've been doing. We've been pulling and tugging on the area of the body called the fascia, which is this connective tissue layer that lives under the skin and around all the muscles. And when we hold the poses for a long time, we pull in that. And more nerve endings live in our fascia that send information back to our brain. Our sensory nerves, more of them are in the fascia than anywhere else. So there's fewer sensory nerves than any other part of the body, with possible certain possible exceptions, but like most of the information that we send back to the brain comes from the fascia, not from the muscle. From the pressure that goes on the skin that the fascia picks up. So we are when we're doing a pose like that, even though it seems like we're not doing much, our nervous system's doing a lot. So at this point, we're just letting that rest happen so that we can sort of slide into and stay with, at least for a while, our parasympathetic nervous system, which helps us sleep better and helps us digest our food and all that good stuff. All the stuff we need to do, repairs the body. So we want to let ourselves have a little time to transition there. Without moving yet, just notice your breath again. And the fantastic part about practicing at your house is that you can decide am I ready to come out of this Shavasana, or do I want to stay a while? So if you decide to stay a while, all you gotta do is just, you know, stay. You can turn off the computer, stay as long as you want. But if you want to, like, maybe come back around and do something else tonight, then you can start with just like a little wiggling of your fingers and toes. Just feel that little ripply movement kind of pass through the body. Stretch the fingers and toes away from one another, and then let them relax and jiggle them again, and then stretch them out, and jiggle them, and then do some little movement with your wrist and ankles. And then usually for me that turns into a big stretch, a little banana at each side. Followed by a back massage and a hug, because it's good to hug your favorite yogi every day. And then, eventually come to a seated position. I am loath to leave this nice warm fuzzy blanket, so I'm going to stay wrapped up for a second longer. So thank you for joining me for some spooky light yin. And let's take a big breath together. Nice big inhale. And a sigh. Namaste, yogis. Welcome to your evening.